Hello, I'm Arif Ansari. Coming up in the Northwest. Hands up if you want to protest, but why aren't more people fighting the cuts? Definitely exercising their right to free speech this week, Julie Hilling, the Labour MP for Bolton West, and Stephen Mosley, the Conservative MP for Chester. Welcome to you both. Julie, what do you feel passionately about? Do you still feel the need to protest about?
For me, it is about austerity. It's what's happening to ordinary people under this government.
That gets you out on the streets?
Yeah.
Stephen? Not that, I imagine.
No, it's trying to improve your local area, trying to help other people, and try and leave something behind that's better than we started with.
But does that require protest? What actually would drive you out onto the streets with some kind of a placard or something?
I think it needs people to be passionate. It needs people to get involved. But yeah, individuals can make a difference. Individuals, by getting involved, trying to change things, can change society and can change the world we live in.
Have you ever been on a protest march?
From time to time, yes. I protested in favour of the amphitheatre in Chester a few years ago, so from time to time, yes.
OK. Well, we'll discuss protests and spending plans a little later, but first, figures out this week show a significant rise in anti-Semitism. The Community Security Trust, which logs incidents for the Jewish community, says they increased by around 80% in Greater Manchester last year. That's backed up by figures from Greater Manchester Police, which is providing extra patrols in Jewish communities. In just a moment, we'll be speaking to the Liverpool Wavertree MP, Luciana Berger, who's been a victim herself. But first, here's Naomi Cornwell, who's been to meet some of the others affected.
Football practice in Prestwich. This is a Jewish club in an area with a large Jewish population.
Most of the football teams have suffered from anti-Semitism to a greater or lesser degree.
One game against another team from Greater Manchester was stopped after allegations of anti-Semitic comments on the pitch.
It's bad enough when it's somebody my age that's being attacked, but when it's children, because that's all they are, they're just kids. You know, and these are kids who are going to go out into society and mix with people. And what's their impression going to be of the wider world?
According to the Community Security Trust, incidents like this are on the rise. The CST is a charity that provides security advice and training for Jewish groups across the UK. It recorded a record number of anti-Semitic incidents last year. Here in Greater Manchester, the number of anti-Semitic incidents rose by 79% last year.
It ranges from thankfully rare acts of violence to verbal abuse. Things like, I'm going to kill you, Jew, has happened to me personally. It includes daubings on gravestones in cemeteries, on windows outside synagogues and other communal buildings, graffiti, this sort of thing. I even had an incident where somebody wrote on the mist on my car, actually wrote dirty Jew.
Well, my own son actually in football, he's only 10 years old, I'd say about 2 or 3 months ago, had an incident where not him, but he heard another child being called a dirty Jew.
I was walking, it was on a Saturday, to take my kids to a group, and some guys in a car just screamed out Jew, and then a load of other Jewish people walking along, they just screamed Jew.
We know that we're the targets, sadly as it is, so we've got a lot of support from the police, and we have our own CST, which is Community Security Service, and they're very good, and really I feel quite safe.
There's been a rise in abuse via social media too. In October, a man with links to an extremist right-wing group was jailed for 4 weeks for sending an anti-Semitic tweet to Liverpool MP Luciana Berger. The Community Security Trust says that anti-Semitic reactions to the conflict in Israel and Gaza that took place in July and August were the single biggest factor in last year's record high. Weeks of protests in Manchester demonstrated the rise in tensions. Pro-Palestinian and pro-Israeli groups gathered outside Kedem, a shop that sells cosmetics made from Dead Sea minerals. Pro-Palestinian protesters called for it to be boycotted, saying that by buying stock from Israel, it makes money for Israel.
I support Israel because I'm a Jew. I have a right to support Israel like you support the Palestinians exactly.
You wouldn't go into Chinatown and accuse a Chinese person of being responsible for the occupation of Tibet. Why accuse me, a fourth-generation British-born Jew, of having anything to do with a sovereign state elsewhere in the world that I have no control over, no power over whatsoever?
But some of those protesters argue that anti-Israeli sentiments aren't necessarily anti-Semitic.
Any anti-Semitism, any Islamophobia, we're against all kinds of racism, and that's actually what we're saying. Palestinians deserve the same rights as anyone else.
I, as a Jew, am charged with anti-Semitism, and I think it's an attack on me and it's an attack on my political rights, but even more, it's trying to disenfranchise the Palestinians.
The CST has stressed that the Jewish community should not be defined by anti-Semitism. But Eric Pickles, the Secretary of State for Communities, has described the figures as a depressing reminder that there is still much work to be done.
We welcome to the studio Mohammed Amin, co-chair of the Muslim Jewish Forum of Greater Manchester, and from London, Luciana Berger. Luciana, what do you put this increase in anti-Semitism down to?
Well, there's a number of different factors. We know that the highest recorded incidents in any one month happened in July and then closely followed by August, and that coincided with events in the Middle East, so there is a direct correlation there. There's lots of other different factors. My own experience was it had nothing to do with the Middle East at all, and I have been on the receiving end of a hate campaign which has come from neo-Nazi elements and from the far right. So there's a number of different contributing factors.
Do you mind telling us a little bit about some of the abuse that you've faced?
So I've received thousands of messages predominantly on social media, and predominantly on the Twitter platform, although on other social media platforms too, where they've sent me lots of different messages that have specifically targeted me because I am Jewish, where they have taken pictures of me and distorted them, adding horns or adding stars of David's onto my forehead, and lots of different hashtags, which I can't repeat on air because they're not suitable and they are racist, totally racist in their nature.
Have you been targeted, do you think, more than other Jewish MPs?
Well, my experience is definitely not symptomatic of the broader Jewish community. I am obviously an MP, I'm in the public eye, so people know who I am. So I wouldn't want to say that my experience is what other people have done. It is very unusual, and it has been on an extreme level, which continues to this day. We do also know that there's been an increase of incidents that have happened on social media, so this is a particular thing that we need to be concerned about. But there's lots of other ways in which anti-Semitism manifests itself, and in which the Jewish community has been targeted.
Do you think social networks such as Twitter are doing enough to stop it?
Well, I think there's been a different response from different social platforms. I do take issue with Twitter, who I know from my experience with the police take a very long time to respond to requests from the police for information in order to endeavour to identify who's behind sending these messages. Just receiving one of these messages can be very, very challenging, and my concern first and foremost is that I happen to be able to speak out as an MP, I happen to be pretty robust, but it could be someone who doesn't have that voice, perhaps a younger person, a teenager, and on that basis, any means by which those platforms are used to incite hate, to intimidate or to bully or to harass should be addressed. And in my example, in my case, it's been anti-Semitism, but there's lots of other examples. And yes, I do think Twitter in particular should be doing a lot more to ensure that their platforms aren't used to promote hate.
And more generally, what do you think should be done to decrease anti-Semitism?
Well, we need to make sure that every minority community in Britain feels that this is their home. There is this week a report coming out from the Parliamentary Committee Against Anti-Semitism, which has been studying what's happened across the UK and looked to other countries. I joined a visit just a few months ago to France to look at the French experience. And this report coming out this week will put forward some very tangible things for government to take note of, to look right from our schools to our communities, to look at what we can do around education, to look at what we can do around internet platforms as well, to really challenge this issue, which not only affects the Jewish community but affects other communities too.
Well, speaking of that, let's bring Mohammed Amin in at this point. What do you put the increase in anti-Semitism down to?
Well, the CST has been keeping records of anti-Semitic incidents for many years. And they are quite clear. Whenever there is what they call a trigger event overseas, typically in the Israel-Palestine conflict, anti-Semitic incidents in the UK sadly go up. And their report specifically refers to 2006 with the Lebanon War, 2009 with the operation in Gaza at that time, and of course 2014 with the conflict in Gaza that we saw last year. And in each case, there was a dramatic increase in anti-Semitic incidents. which then gradually tail off and it reduces to what you would call a sort of baseline level. 2013 saw the lowest year since 2004, for example, because there were no trigger events.
Why, though? Why is that leading to an increase in anti-Semitism?
The reason it leads to an increase in anti-Semitism, sadly, is because many people in the UK, both white British people and, unfortunately, also Muslim people, look at what's happening in Israel and Palestine. At its bluntest, they see Arabs being killed in Gaza, and they want to go out and attack the nearest Jew. It's very bad behaviour, it's very sad, but at an analytical level, you can understand the thought process that leads that way.
And do you see it as a problem that's getting worse?
I think it's about the same. The statistics for 2009 and for 2014 are actually pretty similar. The long-term solution is better education, better understanding, and for people to understand that if you care passionately about what's happening in the Middle East, the thing to do is to get politically engaged in this country, to join a political party, to work to change British policy, rather than attacking somebody. Attacking a synagogue does nothing to help Palestinians.
Indeed. Julie, what do you put this all down to?
I mean, I think the other contributors are absolutely right, that it is about the triggers are often things that happen in the Middle East. But I also think that we've got an increase in hate crimes across the board. So actually there's an increase in Islamophobia, there's an increase in attacks on disabled people. So actually we're in a situation, I think, where those crimes continue. And of course, well, part of the thing about the social platforms is that actually they can be anonymous. So actually you can say the most hateful things, and it's not like facing somebody face to face. But I also think the rise of UKIP has unleashed racism in this country again. I think that we're not doing enough to educate people.
Really? You're blaming UKIP?
No, well, I think the I'm not saying that UKIP is racist at all, but I think that we're now having a much wider conversation about immigration and about blaming people, incomers to this country, and blaming them for the deficit, blaming them for the things that are bad that are happening in the country. So I think there's a wider picture.
The rise in UKIP has fuelled it?
No, not fuelled it. I think it's contributed into that debate. So actually, people are I think, feel freer to be racist now than they were in the past.
Stephen?
I do have some sympathy with what Julie's saying there. I do think that people are saying things now in a way that they might not have done a few years ago. Whether that's a cause or an effect, I wouldn't want to go there. But in terms of the anti-Semitic incidents that we've been seeing, from the top of government, the Prime Minister, Theresa May, have all been very firm on this. They're very committed to protecting members of the Jewish community. And we've seen from the VT about how effective the work with the police is. There is a lot of work going on. So people shouldn't be unduly worried. It is just something which is increasing as time goes on.
Luciana, before we let you go, can I ask you about a different issue, which is that the Mayor of Liverpool, Joe Anderson, has said that he doesn't expect there to be a devolution deal, and he regrets that there'll be no regional mayor for Merseyside. Do you agree with him? Do you share those regrets?
Well, I mean, I hope that, that over time that things will develop, that we can get a deal, because I know ultimately what's most important is that we get something that the people of Merseyside want. And we are clear that, or I'm clear that we do want to see more control locally, because there's lots of things that we can be doing across the Liverpool City region if we had the funds directly to do them ourselves. We'll have to wait and see what happens, but I'm clear that if we can have that additional resource, then it could make a massive positive impact, and also the power to determine what happens locally.
All right, Luciana Berger, thank you very much indeed, and Mohammed Amin, also thank you for coming in. The anti-austerity movement has propelled thousands onto the streets of Madrid and Athens in recent weeks. Massive protests against spending cuts have even swept new governments into power. So why aren't we seeing more of that here? This week, Manchester City Council organised an anti-government rally. Chris Ryder's been assessing how it measured up.
It was back in the 1930s when mass unemployment and poverty drove 200 men to march in protest from Jarrow to Downing Street. And now across Europe, the fight against austerity has brought thousands onto the streets. But in the centre of Manchester this week, a rather more sedate affair. The chance still to get a point across.
I will fight any government that has an austerity programme, you know, whether it's Labour or Tory.
Staging a protest is nothing new. It's part of our right to free speech, but the future of protesting may lie within social media rather than people walking down the streets carrying placards. It was a small turnout here at Albert Square. Was that down to apathy, or did people believe that the cuts should be made?
The organiser of the rally accepts there's a different future ahead.
I personally think we've turned the corner, that it will be for very rare occasions that people will take to the streets. People are increasingly taking to their screens, because a screen is a combination of private and public, and it works for people.
By next year, Manchester City Council will have made around £300 million of cuts since 2011 and shed 3,400 jobs. The fire service will have cut £37 million, and by 2018, Greater Manchester Police will have made cuts of £271 million. One councillor who's left Labour to contest Warrington South at the general election says the calls for a different solution will come eventually.
What will make the government listen is people power, getting out on the streets. It will come to Britain if we carry on making the most vulnerable pay for the problems in our society.
The Conservatives hope their proposed Northern Powerhouse will bring more than £18 billion to the region by 2030. So is that what's keeping people off the streets? What we do know is that modern technology is playing a key role.
Politicians are more accessible than they've ever been, that's right. People can get messages to us. But it does just mean that the general sort of mass campaigning that we may have seen previously is not quite as prevalent as it was before.
And the future still bleak. The Institute for Fiscal Studies believes the worst of the UK spending cuts are still to come.
So, Julie, why aren't we seeing more people protesting?
I think what we are seeing is an awful lot of people who are really suffering because of the cuts that have taken place. As the piece has just said, we haven't seen anywhere near the extent of how the cuts are going to be.
But there have been substantial amounts of cuts so far.
There have, and often those cuts have affected the poorest in our society, the ones least able often to have a voice. So if you think about what's happening to elderly people, what's happening to families. And I think that we have a choice as a society in the end. Of course, we've got to pay down the deficit. We've got to look at how we make pay that down in a fair way.
Do you think maybe a lot of people just think, actually, we need these cuts?
I think people don't want their services to be cut. I think a lot of people don't understand where power lies and where those services are, who's making those cuts on their services, whether it's the council, whether it's the government. But I think people also find it hard to know how to fight those cuts too.
Stephen, have you been relieved that the protests haven't been more popular than that?
Well, I think most people realise the state the country was in 2010. We were spending too much, we were borrowing too much, and we were taxing too much. And they recognise that the government has got to do something about that. And the government has been doing about it. It's been a difficult choice. I think none of us in politics want to go into politics to cut spending. However, we realise it's got to be done if we want a better future for future generations. And
well, let me stop you there, because Chris mentioned that prophecy of doom from the Independent Institute for Fiscal Studies. Here's what they had to say.
There's a lot more austerity to come, I'm afraid, on government's plans. We've got the biggest additional austerity over the next several years of any of our competitor countries, and that reflects the fact that we've had a bad economic performance in the first couple of years of this Parliament, and therefore significantly additional spending cuts to come.
I mean, reality is, Stephen, that if you're re-elected, then the cuts are going to be even deeper, much deeper.
Well, I'm hoping that if I'm re-elected, we're able to continue what we're doing at the moment, which is creating more growth, creating more jobs. We see more jobs created in the past year in the North West and in the whole of France.
And implementing more cuts.
But if you're seeing people in work, if you're seeing people earning their own living, if you're seeing people create wealth, then actually there's less reliance on public services. So you can reduce public spending, but people are better off if they're working for themselves than if they're reliant upon the state.
Well, we can't cut our way out of austerity. And what's been shown in terms of the government's finances is actually, yes, there are jobs created, but an awful lot of those are 0 hours, low-paid, minimum wage jobs. And actually, those people then are not paying into the exchequer. They're still taking money out of the tax system.
A lot are actually genuine jobs as well.
mainly low paid.
Really?
And yes,
The
if you look at,
majority, are you sure?
If you look at the government has not got as much in through taxation as it expected to with the rise in employment, because people are still dependent on tax credits, etc.
Isn't the Julie, sorry, to steer you back onto the cuts, isn't the reality that if Labour's elected, you're going to be implementing cuts as well?
Yeah, we have not hidden from the fact that we will have to be making cuts, but it's about which cuts do we make and about growing our way out of this situation as well. So what's happening at the moment is we've cut tax for the rich, but we've also then cut services for the poor. What we need to do, what we're saying is we will put the tax back up for the richest so that the people with the broadest shoulders bear the most of the burden, and that people with the least able to are actually supported in this situation.
A brief response, Stephen.
Well, if you haven't got a strong economy, we can't have any public services at all. So the emphasis has got to be on getting a strong economy, and that's, I'm afraid, where Labour falls down.
Okay. Let's leave it there, because it's time to find out what else has been happening this week, and here's Ian Haslam with 60 seconds.
There was some welcome financial news this week for one of our local authorities. Lancashire County Council said it's received a windfall of £52 million from the money markets. When is a Conservative club not a Conservative club? When it tries to become a social club, apparently. One club in Haywood is being threatened with legal action because it wants to sever its political ties.
I am a Conservative. I've stood at council for Conservatives. But I want what's best for this club.
Blackpool South MP Gordon Marsden voiced concerns over the widening gulf between Blackpool Football Club's owners and fans. One unhappy fan is considering standing on the issue at the general election. Towns and cities in the north have double the number of empty shops in the south, the report said this week. Almost 1 in 5 is vacant. And UKIP's deputy leader and North West MEP Paul Nuttall is to contest Bootle at the general election. Labour's held the seat for 70 years.
Well, you're both in marginal seats as we approach election day. Stephen, do you think you're going to hold on? You're Labour's number 9 target in the North West.
It feels very positive. We've put an awful lot of work. The government's done some fantastic work. We're seeing the improvements in Chester and in the North West.
You have to say that, don't you?
It feels good.
You have to say that, don't you?
I don't have to say it at all, but just from my own experience of going out speaking to people locally, it feels very positive.
And Julie, you're the Tories' number 1 target.
Yes, in the end, of course, it depends on the voters in Bolton West, but I think that they have had enough of this government and that they recognise that I've been doing a good job for them, and they will continue to support me.
So you think you're going to hold on?
I sincerely hope so.
OK, well, we will see as we approach election day. So just time for me to thank my guests, to Stephen Mosley and to Julie Hilling for coming in. And now we return to London and to Andrew Neil. Thank you very much.